Please be seated. One person who has taught me a great deal about what it means to be a saint is a woman named Ruth. And Ruth lived to be 96 years old. And I knew her in her 95th year of life. From spending just 1 minute with her, I could tell that she was full of wisdom. And so I made it a custom to sit next to her every Thursday after Bible study while she waited for her ride. She had these great one-liners, and I started writing them down once I caught on that she was full of these great things. One of them was, "I like to learn something new every day. It keeps my mind sharp." And a personal favorite was, "I love people. I just love them." You could see why she would be a saint. She was also opinionated, and once she made her mind up, that was that. One time, after she had a bad spell of bronchitis, I called and told her I was going to visit her. She had been too weak to come to church. And so I said, "I'm going to come visit you and bring you communion. When can I come?" And she kept saying, "No, you don't need to come visit me." And so she told me no 3 times, and at that point I knew that I should give up. Each time she had a great excuse, like, "Well, I don't want you to catch what I had," even though she wasn't contagious anymore. She was just recovering. Or she said, "You have other things to do, and I'll be just fine." So I gave in, and as I said goodbye, she said, "You go on and be a good girl and go do your thing." And only Ruth could get away with that. One day, as we were talking after Bible study, she told me about how her husband died. And it involved errors in medication after he had a heart attack. Very soon after that, he had a stroke and died. And at the time, many people in her life were encouraging her to sue the doctors. But she wouldn't listen to them. She knew that the errors were just that. They were errors. Or perhaps they weren't errors, like many people thought. But she knew that the doctors were doing their best. They didn't mean to harm him. She was able to forgive in what seemed like an unforgivable thing. And she loved people unconditionally and embodied all the virtues that we might like to possess as Christians. I'm wondering if you know someone like this. Many of you might be just thinking of the same person. People like Ruth aren't so common in the world. There was something special about her. I know that we like to think that being Christians makes us better people and helps us to be on a good path and to be what we would say a good person. But I find that on average, I'm still easily annoyed or judgmental. I'm not always the best at caring for others, and sometimes despite all of these things, when I do something good, I really like to pat myself on the back for it. Yet God calls us saints. This year, as we observe All Saints' Day, I hope we can remember and give thanks for the saints in our lives and what they have added to our journey. A good way to do that is to tell a family member what they mean to you, why they're a saint in your life, how they've made an impression on you. We have candles that show the saints that we're remembering. But wouldn't it be wonderful to hear that you are a saint from someone? So call someone who has been a living saint in your life and let them know you thought of them on All Saints' Day. We also look to the saints that Luke speaks about in our gospel. Luke says that the poor and the hungry and those who weep and those who are hated and those who are excluded are saints. The saints are those we treat differently because of the color of their skin. The saints are those whose lives we are not concerned about because we can't see their humanity, not the way that God can. The saints are those who work for peace in the conversations where agreeing with one another is simply, seemingly impossible. Saints are those who are meek, who we may often try to take advantage of. The saints are those who mourn. Please remember these saints in our world today. We know that we are saints because we are created in the image of God. But because of this, we've heard God's call to love one another. And we find ways to do this in our lives. I was delighted one day to hear a less saintly story about Ruth. She told me what took place in her school on Armistice Day, probably, I'm guessing 85 years before. A neighbor boy had shot her dog. I'm not sure what the overall circumstances were, but she was very mad, as you can imagine. And so she planned on, when the bell rang to change classes, she planned on hitting him over the head with a stack of books. But as I mentioned, it was Armistice Day. So when the bell rang, that was actually for a moment of silence. But not thinking, she went across the room and clobbered him over the head. And she insisted, to the day she died, that she probably gave him a concussion, and she felt so terrible about it. She shared this once during Bible study, and one woman said, "Ruth, I'm sorry, but he deserved it. He shot the dog." And she said God was supposed to punish him if he needed to be punished. And she said, "Let me tell you, he got punished anyway. He married this woman named Stormy." And she paused. "And he lived in a house with great big plate glass windows in the living room. And she threw him through the window. The man that shot my dog, she threw him. So you see, he got punished already. I wouldn't have had to punish him." And all those years later, she still didn't forgive herself for doing that. And I tried helping her let go of that, but it was one of those things. She made up her mind. And it was always going to bother her. Because of things like this, I wonder if she ever knew really what a saint she was for so many people. Realistically, I know that no one can be perfect, but that's not what being a saint is about. It's about being holy in God's eyes. It's about being created in the image of God. It's about the ways that God makes us holy. God came to earth in Jesus to live and die in the flesh. Not to love perfect people, but to love all of us, God's people who are both saint and sinner. And if any of you think that you are more of a sinner than a saint, then we need to talk to help you understand how God has made you a saint. God has already decided that you are holy, that you are worthy of love, that you matter. When we see others as less than saints, we need to explore that as well. Do we only see God's promises for us? Do we think that others haven't earned it? If we've made mistakes, do we forget the power of God's grace in others' lives? Because when we don't treat others as saints, it will be harder for them to believe that they are saints and follow God in their lives. The saint part reminds us that we have been loved and have been called to share that love with others. Even when we mess it up, that the gospel can still be seen and heard through our lives. The sinner part reminds us we are forgiven because of Christ's love for us. Sometimes the saint in others can exemplify Christ's very love for us. And when I think about if God is sometimes disappointed in us, I think about that one famous line that Ruth always said, and imagine God saying this about us. I love people. I just love them. Thanks be to God.